we went out and basically told, so where do you get deal flow from? I think like sourcing. So we went out and told a bunch of funds like, hey, we're here. Here's the check size we write. We're super collaborative. And having a collaborative strategy, now that I'm a peer, it's like different than being a lead strategy. And so I think for us, it's like, who are the people who we want to co-invest with? Let's go educate.
At Context Ventures, our Advancing VC podcast covers all things startup and venture capital, but primarily how venture capital is changing from the emerging manager perspective. We'll be talking with venture capitalists, limited partners, and founders who are actively working at the frontiers of our industry and advancing venture capital. Today, our guest is Kathleen Estreich, a partner at PearVC with a background in leading marketing teams who started a venture fund, MarketOne, and who now invests in startups and emerging managers at PearVC. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Especially the day after election. I wanted to understand how you got into startups and venture capital.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've been in the Bay Area since 2007. I went to college on the East Coast, and then my older brother actually went to Stanford, which I think is no surprise to anyone around here. Everyone from Stanford seems to have worked at startups or touched startups. And so actually, I thought I was going to go into politics. I interned in the Senate the summer between my junior and senior year. I went to Brown for undergrad. And then after spending a summer there, I was like, oh, things move a little bit slower there. And it was in a swamp. And so I realized I was more of a West Coaster than an East Coaster, having grown up in Oregon. So I talked to my brother, who is, I think, a 24-year-old CEO at his first company. And I was like, I think I want to move to California. I think I want to work in tech. And he was like, if you're serious about it, come out here and visit me. I'll set you up at some companies to interview at. And one of those companies happened to be Facebook. So I went in and interviewed, and I didn't even know what job I was interviewing for, which I don't recommend going into an interview blind, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And they offered me a job during my senior year, and the job was in customer support. And I actually almost didn't take the job because I was like, oh, customer support. But my brother, being the wise older brother that he is, said, you're an idiot. The company's growing like crazy, and this is how startups work. Just come in, join, do a good job, and you'll get a ton of opportunities. And so I listened to his advice. I graduated from college, drove cross country to my girlfriend's, and lived on my brother's couch in his garage for a couple of months because I had a job but no apartment. And then started working at Facebook. And about 9 months in, I transitioned from the customer support team to the PR team, which was a really amazing experience. And then I've worked in tech kind of ever since, but that was sort of my entree, and I think very lucky, and also ended up at a company that was just a true rocket ship, and got to do a lot of things that I probably had no business doing in my mid-20s, but it was kind of a life-changing opportunity.
I think most people who join startups end up doing things they have no business doing, but quickly learn. That's the beautiful thing about startups. After that, it feels like you've done a fair bit of marketing leadership roles. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I got onto the comms team at Facebook, which was actually pretty interesting because at the time there wasn't a big marketing team. So the comms team did stuff that a traditional comms team maybe might not do. So we did all of our launches, announcements, worked really closely kind of across the whole company. I actually started and ran the first internal comms team at Facebook as the company was scaling. And so got to be exposed to like the product and engineering team, launched some of our first open source projects, which at the time was like a pretty big deal. And so from that, then I moved on to the platform marketing team and got to work on a bunch of cool launches and the launch of Open Graph, and then did some engineering marketing. And from there, after 6 years at Facebook, I was like, okay, I think I want to try something else. So I moved to Box and led the platform marketing team there when we were starting to productize our APIs. And so I started and ran the first developer conference there, kind of leveraging my experience of working on F8 and other dev marketing stuff at Facebook. It was so shocking though, because the Facebook platform was so big and had so much distribution. And then at Box, it was more of an enterprise platform. So that was just a huge, steep learning curve. I remember my first month at Box, I thought everyone was speaking a different language when they said ARR, MRR, SDR, all of the things. I would be like, okay, what does this actually mean? And then spent a couple of years there kind of growing and scaling the platform. And then I went to Intercom as we were kind of scaling up a lot of our go-to-market. The SF team, I think, was about 20 people, and all of R&D was in Dublin. We just closed our Series C, and we're kind of trying to move up market and really figure out kind of how we scaled the business from there. And then I was at a company called Scalar that I joined as the 13th employee and joined to lead marketing, and then ended up taking on kind of all the business functions outside of sales, helped raise a Series A, and then the company was later acquired by SentinelOne. So then I started MarketOne. So kind of made that transition. But I think at each stage, I was sort of just like looking for those growth opportunities and products that I loved and audiences that I was excited to kind of bring a product to market and spend a bunch of time in.
What's fascinating about your background is it, at least on the marketing side, you end that scaler, but it sounds like that's what you've been doing at companies. Meta, Facebook, Box, Intercom. And what's also really interesting is very different businesses, B2C, B2B. Are there any like major marketing takeaways that you have that apply to both B2C and B2B?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I get asked a lot like, oh, is developer marketing different than B2B, than B2C? I mean, I think good marketing is getting a deep understanding of who is my customer, what problems do they have, what problems does my product sell or solve, and then how do I sort of bring that to market in an authentic, helpful, value add way. And so I think there's no substitute for just like good marketing, and the ways that you do it matter. You'll have different channels or different sort of priorities and different team structures and all that across B2B, B2C, inbound driven versus more top down. But I think at the end of the day, it's like what you're trying to do for marketing is like generate demand for your product and kind of bring people into the funnel and then help them move through that funnel. And I think to do that, you have to like deeply understand and care about your customer in a like pretty authentic, deep way. So I think like product marketing is at the heart of a lot of marketing, especially in the early days with startups. Like now I spend most of my time at like pre-seed, seed, some Series A stuff. And I think that at that stage, like you really have to understand how does your product fit into your customers' lives and what problems are you solving? How are you helping them? What helps them get promoted? And then like build your product into that. And I think sometimes if you focus too much on like the nuts and bolts and the features of your product and you lose sight of like, you're selling to human beings and how are you going to help them? That's where marketing can kind of go off the rails. But
interesting. When I talk to marketers, and I have a little bit of a marketing background, there's always this silly but serious conversation around brand versus performance. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what your take is if like, and it's different, like early stage startups, some of them like, I'm really going to focus on brand or I'm going to really focus on performance. What's your take on the whole brand versus performance or brand and performance?
Yeah, so we talked about this a lot when we were when Emily and I were running MarketOne, and we had an analogy that was, if marketing is like a car, then you need the fuel and the engine. So the fuel is like the positioning, messaging, story, content, and the engine is like distribution, the ops, the analytics. And I think you need both, and you need to have the balance of both, and you need both working together. Because if you only focus on the fuel, creating all these great things, but no one's seeing them, it's ineffective. And if you only focus on distribution, but none of that stuff is converting, then it's ineffective. And so you need both the fuel and the engine. And I think that, in the last probably 10 years, we've moved so far to the performance side that we've lost sight of kind of the more brand content, like product marketing stuff. And so I think you need both, to be clear. But I think kind of where you flex and how you flex matters, and getting those working together. So oftentimes when I meet founders, like marketing's not working, it's like, okay, let's, diagnose what's going on. Do you have a fuel problem? Do you have an engine problem? Do you have a fuel and engine problem? Because I think you honestly need both for marketing to actually work for you.
Fascinating. And your marketing background, were you able to do both? And so by the time you started MarketOne with your teammate, you all had a really good fluency of both.
Yeah, I think when you lead a marketing team, you have exposure to all sides. I think where I spike personally as a marketer, I came up through like comms and product marketing. So that's where I'd say I'm like strongest. I'm good on the content stuff. I'm probably the weakest on the growth side, but like have had to manage the growth side of things. So I'm like good enough, but if you were to hire me to run head of demand gen, I'm probably not the best person in the world to do that, but I know how to manage that person and how to set them up for success. And so I think as a marketing leader, you have to be broad and deep, and you need to spike in the areas that the business needs you to spike in. And so I think Emily and I both run marketing teams across different stages and had done all of the things. Actually, when I was at Scalar, that was like my sort of introduction into a lot of the performance growth side of things, touching it far more deeply than I had in any other role. And so learned a ton there. But I think that to be an effective marketing leader, if you are not generalist enough, your strategy isn't going to be comprehensive and you're going to miss out. And so for anyone who wants to be like a head of marketing or VP of marketing, look at their backgrounds. Like they've all done all parts of marketing, because I think what you need as a leader is to figure out how all these pieces fit together so that you can bring them to market, do campaigns that are holistic, that you get the most bang for your buck and have the biggest impact. And I think the hardest thing for like a marketing leader is actually prioritization, like figuring out there's a million things we could do. What should we do and how do we focus? And I think that's the other thing of like, if you're looking holistically at it as a marketing leader, then you need to know how to prioritize across everything, not just within product marketing or brand or demand gen. So
fascinating. And this actually reminds me of something a mentor of mine said, Paul McGarrett at Meritech, who co-founded it. He said that when him and his partner studied the people from industry that made it into venture, they found that it was mostly marketers and CMOs. And I think this actually ties in now with like MarketOne. Can you talk about the genesis of MarketOne and what led to it and what you all focused on?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that, because we saw a gap that like most founders didn't come from a marketing background and most investors didn't come from a marketing background. So in 2020, so about 4 years ago, Emily and I had known each other for a while because she was the first marketing leader in Asana and actually hired my sister onto her team. And so that's how we initially met in like 2013, 2014. And we're both kind of figuring out what we wanted to do with our careers. And so we started talking. It was the pandemic. Everyone was home and had a lot of time to hang out. I had a 9-month-old at the time, or 10-month-old. And so we were like, okay, let's team up. And we both loved working with founders. And so we decided to team up and just start advising companies and angel investing together and kind of starting to see like, okay, what could come of this? And so we reached out to all the VCs we knew. And we said, hey, do you have any early stage companies that need help in marketing? We can help in these kind of key areas. Do they need help on product marketing? Do they need help with their growth strategy? Do they need help kind of figuring out what their team should look like? And so for about a year, we spent time working with like, I think 100 companies at some capacity, kind of figuring out early stage marketing with the founders. And I think a couple of themes came up. Like there was a huge gap in terms of knowledge about marketing. And so that was actually why we started the MarketOne newsletter, which I think is very well read now. But we were getting the same questions over and over. And the first thing, our first newsletter is actually about the org structure of a marketing team, because most founders had never managed marketing before, had never seen it before. And so they're like, here's what product marketing is, and here's what it does, and here's what content marketing is, and all the functions and what they do and how you should think about the early org structure. And we found a couple themes after working with all of these companies. One is that the best product doesn't always win. Like you need to have the best product and differentiated distribution. And so we were mainly focusing on B2B companies because that's where I had spent, and Emily had spent the last 10 plus years. And so we kind of came up with this thesis around marketing advantages. And so through working with all these companies for about a year and angel investing and seeing like which companies were going to do well, which companies, were maybe struggling, we then decided to start initially a syndicate and then a fund around this thesis that like you need a great founder, you need a big market, you need a great product, but you also need to win on go-to-market and specifically have some sort of marketing advantages that are going to help you win. And so we set out initially to raise a $5 million fund to be a collaborative check, pre-seed through Series A, B2B, and help founders do two things. One, build their marketing strategy to like help them figure out where do you focus, what are your kind of unique advantages, and two, hire on the marketing side, because most companies were getting the first marketing hire wrong. And it sets you back 6 to 12 months anytime that happens with like a pretty pivotal role within a startup. And so that's where we had kind of come up with this, ideal sort of framework around like, what does the first marketing hire need to look like? It's different for each company, but there's like some general rules of thumb. And then we work with the companies, like interview and hire that person and then set them up for success. And then building the marketing strategy, like where should you focus as a company? So we ran the firm, we ended up raising a $6 million fund. We invested in 34 companies, and help the founders and continue to help the founders kind of in those two key areas where we saw just this huge gap in the market. Because if you go look at most VCs, the founders are not, founders are often coming from a product or engineering background, sometimes sales. And then most investors are not coming from a marketing background.
So much there to unpack. So fascinating. First line of questions are around MarketOne.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of emerging managers, including myself, in the 2020 and 2021 era. And now we're feeling a little bit of a contraction in venture. You have found yourself at PearVC, a very established firm now. And we'll talk about that, but I want to talk a little bit more about MarketOne. So you had mentioned first you did some syndication. Was this angel list? Like how?
Yeah. So we did 5 syndicate deals, and that was like the heyday of syndicates, 2021. I think everyone was doing syndicates, and we found it was syndicates are hard. Like a very specific type of deal does well in a syndicate, and it's often a well-known lead. Well-known founders, it's sort of like what you would expect. And I think it's a lot harder to get LP and for each syndicate deal, you have to, get investors who want to put money into that deal. We're like, this is actually like quite a lot of work for each deal. And and it's not necessarily the companies. I think the deals we did were really good, but there were a bunch of other deals that we could have done, but we were like, it's hard to get LPs to want to bet on this because it's somewhat contrarian or different. And so that was actually the genesis of why we wanted to raise the fund so that we could make those calls. And it's the same amount of work to get people to invest in the fund as to do each of these syndicate deals, but then we have a little bit more control over making those investment decisions in things that we were really excited about and spending all of our time doing.
I find that people underestimate how much work it is to do a syndicate.
Totally, yeah.
Because you first have to get the opportunity, then you have to get the allocation, then you have to go to some investors and determine how much of that allocation. So it's a puzzle that is just so complicated and ongoing and fluid. And then in terms of fundraising itself, you all raised more than you all had intended to raise. How was that? Because most of the times when you talk to emerging managers, they're like, that's the hardest aspect of it.
Fundraising is so hard. It's so hard, but I think if you don't like fundraising, you should not be an emerging manager because that's where you spend so much time. And so we set off. So actually, we decided to do the fund in fall of 2021. The market was still pretty good. I actually had my son like the month that we decided to kick off the fundraise, which was like interesting timing. But we had a couple companies that we had been working with that we knew were going to raise that we wanted to get in. So we got our initial money in late 2021. I had my son; he's now three. And then we came back and hit the fundraise pretty hard in January, like late January, and then got to about 4.5 in April, and then targeted 5, but then we're like, let's try and get to 10, and then the market totally crashed. So we ended up getting to 6, which was more than our initial target, not as much as we thought we might be able to raise had frothier times lasted longer. But I think for us, it was kind of figuring out, and this was a big learning for me, is like, who are the right LPs for that size fund? And I think that's also something like, what is our product market fit as investors? And so we took a different approach. Like Emily and I both come from like marketing backgrounds. We're not like traditional venture. We're not founders. We're 2 women, which, is not the typical demographic. And so initially some of our LPs that we had early, we got Bain pretty early, which I think was very helpful. And they're an amazing fund of funds. And I think they do a lot to sort of give that credibility to emerging managers and have, resources to help you there. Then we got a few kind of high net worth individuals. We got a lot of GPs from existing funds. And then our strategy, because we were this marketing focused fund, was to go after marketers. And so a lot of marketers don't invest, and they're actually incredibly valuable to companies. And so we took a different approach where we started educating marketers. Like we would have events and reach out to all the marketers we knew. And we're trying to teach them about like angel investing, syndicate investing, fund investing. And then we invited them to be LPs in our fund for a much lower minimum than the average investor. And that allowed them to get access to this, traditionally kind of inaccessible asset class. And so we had 80 plus marketer LPs. I think over half of them were women, which we're also very proud of because it's also a demographic that's not often asked to be an LP in a fund. And so we ended up with 150 LPs. It was many more conversations of no's to get to those 150 yeses. And so I think you just have to run it like a sales process, the hard thing is you're selling yourself. So it can feel very personal when someone says no, but it's not you. So you just have to kind of keep going and run the process. And I felt really grateful that Emily and I had each other where, we pump each other up for these calls. But I think, it's a slog and it's a numbers game and it's a funnel. And you just kind of have to keep going and keep telling the story and, have that differentiation. And I think there's so many funds out there. So I think you really have to express why do you exist? What gives you the right to meet these great founders? How are you sourcing? How are you going to win? And then how are you going to help? And then a lot of our founders, were very supportive because we were working so closely with them. So they helped, do a lot of reference calls for us and such. So I think those things can create a flywheel, but it's really hard. And I think Fund Ones are a great learning experience and humbling too of how it all works.
So much to also unpack there. And thank you for just being so candid about that experience. The first is, reflecting on my experience, is that there are GPs who will invest in other funds. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about those GPs is they tend to actually be very helpful because they're I think there's a little bit of, they sympathize and empathize. And they're just here, let me try to tell you what I've learned and how you can incorporate it. The other thing is leveraging communities. I think that's really smart. I've heard of a fund recently that leverages CIOs, and marketers make a ton of sense. If you all had 150 LPs, I gotta believe there's probably 1,000 conversations you had. And so now when I think of you, I'm not thinking of you just as someone who has an abundance of marketing management experience, but you have an abundance of sales experience. And so, I mean, and it's a joke within marketing, it's brand performance, but within a company, it's marketing or sales.
Yeah.
And so I feel you know both very, very well.
Yeah, it was a humbling experience because I've never led sales at a company. And I was oh, I guess I have to get into sales. But I have led recruiting at 2 companies. And I actually think sales and recruiting are pretty similar skill sets, just slightly different audiences. But yeah, it was pretty humbling for me to be oh, I actually have a lot of empathy for salespeople now, in a way that maybe I didn't before.
And so as I think about MarketOne, the challenge was fundraising. But the good thing is you had helped a lot of pre-seed and seed companies. So the deal flow was there. Yeah. And then clearly the ability to provide value on both marketing and sales was there. Can you talk us through some of the lessons you learned after you all closed the fund and you all started investing? What were some takeaways? Yeah,
so I think for us it was being really clear with, we went out and basically told, so where do you get deal flow from? I think sourcing. So we went out and told a bunch of funds hey, we're here, here's the check size we write, we're super collaborative. And having a collaborative strategy, now that I'm up here, it's different than being a lead strategy. And so I think for us it was who are the people who we want to co-invest with? Let's go educate. And so we actually did some talks we actually did a talk for Pear, for their founders around early stage marketing. We did some talks for first round and some other funds, where we would just kind of add value to their founders so that we were giving something to these funds before we asked for something. And I think that's very much in this ecosystem, there's a lot of emerging managers. So what can you give before you ask? And so we tried to give value to these firms so that they would send us their best deals. We would send them companies that we thought were interesting because they were a lead and we were not. And so, hey, we met this great company, they're on the market, do you want to meet them? So I think deal flow goes both ways. It's not just receiving it, it's also sending it out and building that network. And then for founders, so I think sourcing is a big thing. How do you actually build the sourcing engine? And I think by the end, I felt really good about our sourcing engine where we were seeing really good stuff coming from a bunch of different places. And it was mostly funds. Our LPs actually sent us a lot of deals because they were connected to all these companies and knew a whole network beyond us. We actually started a Slack channel for our LPs so they could send us stuff and better, communicate with us. Our founders were incredible resources for us because great founders know other great founders. And if you're super helpful and someone says, hey, who's the most valuable person on your cap table? Our goal for MarketOne was to be the most valuable person on the cap table, regardless of our check. Our check was not the biggest, but we wanted to be the most valuable. And I still get texts and calls from a lot of our founders asking me much different things than marketing, but just because we've built a good relationship with them and we're helpful and actually not just helpful, VCs are all helpful, but actually delivering value to them, which I think it goes a long way and it pays itself forward. So I think of all these things as compounding. Like you come in, you do a good job, you build a good reputation, people want to work with you, they send you good people. And that has actually continued. The other group that we built a good relationship with was other emerging managers, because I think we're not competing necessarily, and we might see things that someone else has a different taste on, or they were pre-seed and we were seed. So I actually became good friends with some pre-seed emerging managers because we were focused on pre-seed through Series A, but we're doing more seed because that's where our value is, I think, a little bit stronger on the marketing side. And so a bunch of these pre-seed emerging managers would just send me great companies that we would meet, which I think was also helpful. And then if we met something that was like maybe a little too early for us, where we weren't quite ready, we'd send it back to them. So I think those things also help as well.
Fascinating. And what's so fascinating is that the layering of deal flow, right? So, there's oftentimes someone thinks there's like just a one unlock or a silver bullet. It's not. And the other thing is that all of that takes a lot of time, right? Because like the reputation, the relationships, the give, and not only did it sound okay, so it sounded like you talked to 1,000 LPs. After that, you talked to 1,000 feels like GPs or funds to like give them value, and also your existing LPs and other founders. So your day is even before you raise a fund and once you raise a fund, it's just meetings.
Yeah, it's a lot of meetings. Yeah. But we also part of how we tried to scale this. So we wrote our newsletter, which we published monthly. And part of that was like advice for founders to build our brand with founders and to build our brand with the ecosystem and with marketers, so that when we were helping our portfolio companies hire, we had a whole candidate pool of people that would help them. So then we also built out like templates and frameworks that people could use. So we tried to scale up and do as much one-to-many as we could. But yes, a lot of stuff ends up being one-to-one. And then it's kind of prioritizing where you spend time. I think that's like the job here. The hardest thing is actually prioritization. I think that's like actually true in every job, where you spend time and what you prioritize, because there's only so many hours of the day.
Fascinating. And what you have said several times now is newsletters.
Yeah.
And what I have found consistently is marketers understand the value of newsletters. It's owned and operated. You're not using Facebook, Meta, Reddit, or someone else's platform. It's your audience and you have a direct relationship with them. We think newsletters are just incredibly important, whether it's the founders or investors. So let's talk about MarketOne and that transition to Pair. Can you talk about the timeline, the decisions, how you thought through it all?
Yeah. So we were coming up earlier this year. So like January-ish, we were getting like 80-ish% deployed out of the fund. And we're starting to think about fund two strategy. I think fund ones are good in a lot of ways. I think, especially for operators coming into venture is so different than operating at a company in every dimension. And so Emily and I had a conversation in early January, and I think we had pretty different interests in sort of what the next 5 to 10 years of our careers look like. And I think for Emily, it was wanting to stay closer to marketing and operating. And for me, it was doubling down on venture. And so the question was, do you go raise a second fund solo, or do you explore joining an established fund? I was ready to go do the second fund solo, and that was sort of the path I was on. And then I've known the Pair team, PearVC and Mar, for a long time. So I met PearVC, I think, in 2011. He was an early angel in my brother's first or second company, I think. And we bonded over soccer. He's a big soccer fan like I am. I actually had him come play on the Facebook soccer team once. We had the Facebook Falcons. It was super fun. And then I met Mar when they had started their fund. Their first fund was called PearVC Mar Ventures. They were in downtown Palo Alto in the back of Coupa Cafe, and it was like pretty humble office, and they're super humble founders. And so I've known them for a very long time. Anytime I was in transition in my career, after I met them, I would go talk to them and say, hey, what companies are interesting? Who should I talk to? So I actually knew a lot of the companies in the Pair portfolio because they had introduced me to them. And we had worked with them as part of MarketOne. We had done some co-investments with them. And so I had seen Mar at a class at Stanford where I was a guest speaker, and I was just telling her, hey, I think I'm going to go raise this fund solo. And Mar was like, no, we're hiring a Pair. Come talk to us. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll talk to you, but I'm pretty sure, I think I want to go do this. Like, I'm really proud of what we've built. We have a strong foundation, go do this. And so I spent more time, we went on a walk, we had many conversations, I met more of the team. And ultimately, I'm at Pear now, so decided to join in June and not raise a second fund. And it was a hard decision, but I think I feel awesome about the decision in a lot of ways. So I think I'm very proud of what we built at MarketOne. I think we built something that needed to exist in the ecosystem. And I think what's cool to see is a lot of funds are now thinking about go-to-market in ways that I think are really helpful to founders. And I think what drew me to Pear was they were a few steps ahead of where I think we were trying to get to as a fund. So a couple of things. One, Page One are amazing. They are two of the best people and best investors. And so the opportunity to go and learn from them was sort of once in a lifetime. Second is I've known them for a very long time. And so I had always said if I didn't start my own fund, Pear is literally the only fund I would go work at. And here I am. So I feel very grateful that the timing worked out and the opportunity is there. Pear is very focused on early stage. So we focus on pre-seed and seed. I love that stage. It's not for everyone. I think it's a lot of work and it's pretty high velocity. There's a lot. The funnel is quite wide at that stage. And so I think you have to like that sort of high velocity, working closely with founders and really helping them get to the next stage, which I really like. Some investors prefer Series A, Series B, but I realized through my experience at MarketOne, I actually really like the stage that Pear invests. And then Pear has a lot of resources for founders on our platform side that help with hiring, that help with go-to-market, that help with PR and things like that. And so I think for me, that was also an extension to have more resources. And frankly, I kind of missed having more of a team. And so it's been really fun, being in an office, which if you asked me 2 years ago if I would ever work in an office again, I would have told you no. I have 2 young kids, so it's working from home is great. I missed it. And I think that in-person interaction is actually really gratifying and it's something that I had missed. And then being able to hear other people's perspectives around companies and deals and what they're seeing and what excites them, it has pushed me, I think, to be a better investor. And so while I had been running our fund and seen a lot, I think Emily and I were just 2 people. So now there's several more people around the table we're not a consensus driven fund, but to hear other perspectives and what other people are seeing and how they're thinking about different markets has been really helpful. And I've learned a ton in the last couple of months.
Fascinating. It feels like it's a glove in hand fit in the sense of it's a similar stage of what you were doing. Second is you've known them for a very long time. As you know, partnerships are the opposite of shotgun weddings. They're you have to know someone for years, if not decades. Yeah. And then the third is the value add aspect. MarketOne, PearVC, very much on go-to-market recruiting. At Pear, you have 2 separate roles that you work on. One is investing in startups, and the other is the emerging manager program. Can you talk about both?
Yeah. So when I joined Pear over the summer, some of the stuff I was talking to the team about, I think emerging managers are such an impactful part of the ecosystem, especially in the early stage. I think they often add things to companies that are hard for established funds to get or to offer. I think that I'm super bullish. They have differentiated deal flow. They have value add to founders. I think the operating turned emerging managers are really helpful because early stage investing is more akin to company building than, a pure Excel finance decision. And so I think I'm pretty bullish on emerging managers generally. I think that there's a lot of actually great programs out there for emerging managers. I think a lot of funds do great stuff. Bain, like I mentioned, they have a whole fund of funds. They were great partners to us and we shared deals with them and they were offered a lot of guidance for us as new fund managers. We had a couple other LPs that were awesome and did great stuff. Foundation runs a great speaker series. There's a lot of Village Global, I think, is doing some really cool stuff. So there's a lot of funds out there that are doing things. So it's there's a lot there. So what could Pear do that was different? And so what we came up with was this emerging manager in residence program. So our criteria was the sub $50 million fund, people who are on fund 1 or fund 2, operators turn emerging managers, and you have some sort of superpower or great skill that you're at that really helps founders. And so what we did is we directly invested in those funds. It was not a huge check, $250K check, but I think
that's a lot for it.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. I think it's not insignificant to a fund that's a sub $50 million fund. I think with that, it's not just a check. And with that check, they get access to our offices. So we have an awesome office in Menlo Park, and we have our Paris studio in SF that's massive and a bunch of founders working out of it. So they get office space, which is actually really nice if you are a small fund and don't have your own office and don't have to pay for it. Then also access to all of our, pair resources that they need. They get, to meet the PearX companies that we're working closely with as part of our PearX Accelerator. We're sharing deals, we're offering LP introductions, and we're helping them finish closing their funds and then bringing them into deals that we're doing, and likewise sending them deals that we think could be interesting. And so we have 3 funds today. We'll run this program on a yearly basis. So we're not adding more funds for about a year, but it's been great. And honestly, we're like figuring out the right sort of, it's a new program, but the 3 funds that we have, I'm super excited about, and we're collaborating really closely.
The connection between your own background and this is really interesting in the sense of exactly what you're getting. You are like, I can tell you which turns you can like make a tighter turn and which turn you should probably like maybe not even make. And Pejman and Mara also have that experience too. So that's one aspect of what you work on. The second aspect, I think, is you're still investing in companies.
Oh yeah, my main job is actually investing in. As I'm pretty focused on seed, although we do pre-seed and seed. So most of our pre-seed strategies run through PearX, which is our accelerator, which is we write $250 to $2 million checks. We run that twice a year, about 20 companies each cohort. But the whole team is really involved with those companies. And then I spend most of my time looking at seed companies. We write $1 to $6 million checks, and I've done a few investments since I joined Pear. So I mostly invest across B2B very broadly. That's where I spend most of my time. But it's interesting. I get a lot of my deal flow from emerging managers still, because I love working with emerging managers. And I think that's actually what makes me a great investor, or yet to be determined if I'm a great investor. But I think it's where I get a lot of my deal flow from is building those relationships with emerging managers, because I can speak the language that they have, and because I've been there. And it's really hard. And I think there's a level of empathy from having done it. And it's so different to be at a big fund. And I tell emerging managers often, like, most of my partners at Pear have never had to fundraise or had to think about fund construction or had to think about kind of, all the back office stuff, like all the things on reporting and just all the
capital calls,
all the ops side,
admin,
LP,
audits.
like a lot of people at Pear actually are involved like LP communication, but go talk to, it's not just at Pear, like go talk to any fund. I remember when I was an emerging manager, I had coffee with someone who was at a bigger fund, and I was like, how much time do you spend on fundraising? It's like 5% of my time. I was like, we live very different lives. And it's such a different job. And I think that's where I can kind of straddle both in a way that I think, is an advantage to me, hopefully, over time. But I think it's like, I think emerging managers and want to help emerging managers continue to be successful, because if you look at the fund returns, they tend to outperform. If you look at the demographics, it's people who are not traditionally offered a seat at bigger funds in venture. And so if we all want to change this industry to look a little bit more like the future we want, I think emerging managers is a very impactful way to do that. And that's why I care so much about it. And the returns are there. It's like a good investment, both from a dollars perspective and from an ecosystem perspective.
The vision and transaction is there. What I applaud you all is so many funds get established and they forget about the emerging managers. And you all haven't done that. If anything, it's like, we'll bring on an emerging manager and we'll create this program. And not many funds do that. And GPs will invest, but it's not out of some type of organization or structure. So Pear these days, you all have your emerging manager program. You have your PearX Accelerator. Do you all still do the Pear Dorm program?
Yep.
And so are there other programs besides those 3?
Yeah, so the other 2 big ones that we have our female founder circle. So we run this, it's a cohort-based program. This one is focused on AI, so it's technical women And it's a 12-week program, and we have them meet once a week. They get free office space in our SF office, and it's women who are thinking about starting companies in AI. And so it's an application process, but one of the things that I think Pear has also done an amazing job, and honestly, it was like a big deal to me as a female investor. It was like joining a fund where there's a female founder. I think it just makes a huge difference in terms of the DNA of the fund. And so I think Mar has done an amazing job of sort of continuing to pave the way for a lot of women. And she was a 2-time founder. She's a PhD from Stanford, like very technical herself. Yeah, Midas List. She and Pedro are both on the Midas List. They're both incredible. And I think, so the two communities that we're fostering, one is Female Founder Circle, the other is Persian Founder Circle, which Pejman is Persian, and there's amazing talent in the Persian community. And so it's probably no surprise if you know the DNA of Pear that those are the two communities that we're heavily invested in. And I think it's a differentiator for us, frankly, as a firm, that our founders come from, not necessarily the traditional VC backgrounds. And I think that gives us an edge as a firm.
Very non-traditional. Selling rugs on Palo Alto. What gets you excited about the future startups and venture capital? I think Pear as a firm that's at the forefront of it. Are there other firms or startups that you find are evolving or really changing the industry?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there's a bunch of interesting things happening right now, and like AI is sort of, that's the default. Like AI is changing everything, but I think it's changing sort of the velocity of which things are moving, which then, has me thinking about like, okay, how do you think about like moats in technology, and what does it actually mean when AI is sort of changing everything so fast? I think there's other sort of ecosystems that are helpful. Like, I was part of First Round Angel Track. I think that program is actually amazing if you want to start angel investing. And it was so helpful for me as someone who, I did it right before we started our fund, and they were very generous with their time and insights and data. So for anyone who's sort of angel investing, I think that, getting some discipline around it and really thinking about it as, less of like, oh, my friend, I'm going to write them a check, but like, how do I evaluate things? And then how do I think about building a portfolio? So I think that program was really good and useful for me. And the community aspect of that is really good. I think that actually with so much noise out there, these like more niche communities are actually where I'm spending more of my time. Maybe it's because I'm getting older and I'm like, I have less time to go to the big things, but I like going to targeted things. And I think the more targeted things I get more value out of at this point in my life and career. And so, like I'm going to the All Raise conference next week, which I'm really excited about, because I think having that space for sort of, meeting and hearing from, other women in venture is super valuable. So I think there's like a lot of different pockets. It's just finding things that like resonate and are going to be helpful to you in your specific sort of area. But those are some areas that have been particularly helpful for me.
Venture feels like it's bifurcating between ultra mega funds,
yes,
general catalysts like speed entries, and then you have established firms. I'll put definitely you all in that, and I'll just go ahead and throw some other like brand name firms like Excel, Greylock, Benchmark, and then you have a whole slew of emerging managers.
Mm-hmm.
Given you have a great vantage point on the latter two, emerging managers and these more established funds, what do you think will happen to the future of emerging managers? That's number one, and then two, broader venture.
Yeah. I think for emerging managers, I think there was a ballooning of emerging managers in the last couple of years where it was sort of a lot of tourists coming through. And I think raising in 2021 was pretty easy. I think a lot of people are going back to market now, and it's significantly harder, especially if you don't have the track record to sort of justify raising another fund. So I actually think we're going to see a decline, but I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think anyone who's starting a fund one now is ambitious, and I wish them the best of luck. And it's going to be really hard. So the ones that raise now and make it, I think, are going to be in a really good position because I think now is actually a really good time to be investing. But I think I think there will be less emerging managers, and you have to be clear about kind of why you're doing it, because the financial side of it is not there for a very long time with emerging managers, especially if you're raising a sub $50 million fund. It's just not. Like, you don't have a ton of management fees, so you have to run super lean. You don't have a ton of resources. It's just like everything is pretty hard. So you'd make a lot more money going and operating in a senior role than you would being an emerging manager. So you have to really want to do it and have a reason to be doing it and differentiation. I think that's one of the things where I've met a lot of emerging managers since I've been at Pear and since we launched this program. And my biggest thing that I'm looking for is this superpower or differentiation. And I think sometimes it's very clear and sometimes it's way less clear. And so I think if you are an emerging manager or thinking about starting your own fund, be so clear about that. Go test that messaging with a handful of people who see a lot of this and see if it's resonating. Because I have met a few where I have given that feedback of like, I really like you, but I don't really understand how you're going to win or how you're going to be extra helpful. You might see stuff, but because you have a different network, but that doesn't necessarily mean founders are going to take your money, because why would they take yours when they could take someone else's who's going to help them with these things? So I think that story and narrative has to be very clear because it's pretty noisy out there. And I think there's also somewhat of a some LP or some people who invest in emerging managers. There are some brand name emerging managers, and so they're, I'll be like, who are the last couple of emerging managers that you invested in? And it'd be names that a lot of people already knew, and so that I think of them as less emerging managers, and a lot of like spin outs from existing funds and stuff. So that's who you're competing against. So you have to have a very clear story of how you're going to win. And then I think from like our goal at Pear is to be the best pre-seed and seed fund in the world. There's 3,000. There's 3,000 funds that do that. And I think a lot of the bigger funds who have raised billions and billions of dollars are starting to come into seed. And so I think for us, it's like continuing to win the right to invest in like the best companies. But I think as these folks get bigger, I think there is an opportunity for us to like pitch ourselves as like, we understand this stage. This is all we do. You're not just like a scout check for us. You are our main check, and differentiating there. And then within seed, there's some really good seed funds too that we compete with. But I think for us, it's like continuing to like add value to founders and win there. But I think, there is a huge bifurcation where like a lot of these bigger funds are significantly larger, but they're all coming to seed now too. So we see them in seed. Like you see General Catalyst in pre-seed. And so I think, the brand is there. And so I think for founders, it's trying to convince them like why we're the best partner for them. But it's competitive. It's super competitive.
Very competitive. I want to build on two things you said. One is value add, and it's so incredibly important for funds, emerging managers, or established to provide value.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second aspect is you have started a fund with a partner. You all at Pear are in 3 funds. 2 of them are solo GP, from my understanding. There's 2 GPs. You've met many. What's your thought on solo GP, non-solo GP?
I think it used to be, from what I've heard, like harder as a solo GP, but I think now that there's been so many GP breakups that it's less of a risk factor. I think the biggest risk with a solo GP is like what happened, key person, like what happens if they lose interest, they get sick, something happens to that person if there's no sort of line of succession. I'm less worried, clearly less worried about it because we invested in 2 of them. But I think they have to be exceptional because they're doing a lot and it's hard. And I think the other thing that I'm looking for with these people is, do they have a network around them? So they're not, it's just like a solo founder too. Like, who's around them to help support them? Because it's really hard to do on your own. And so you might be a solo GP, but you probably have an informal advisory board around you of people helping you and who want to help you win. And I think that as long as they have that, I think that's okay. And it's the same thing with, solo founders used to be, not a thing. You really need a co-founder. And I think that's less true today.
I think technology and software has enabled that in terms of fund admin
Mm-hmm.
and all the different things that 10 years ago you probably needed, now you don't.
Yeah.
I want to close this out with some rapid fire friendly questions.
Okay.
Favorite movie?
Oh, man.
Or movies?
My favorite movie used to be Good Will Hunting. I just love that movie.
It's a great movie. so many great lines.
Now the movies I'm watching are like little kid movies, so I'll stick with that.
So often, I think of the line, "How do you like them apples?" Especially for like a lot of founders who get no's and then they raise around and then they do really well.
Yeah.
And then the interview scene with Ben Affleck where Matt Damon sends him to go interview and he's like retainer.
Yeah.
And it's just so entertaining.
So good.
So good. Favorite books or book or recent book that you read?
I'm a big fan of Shoe Dog. I have this on my Pear profile because I grew up in Oregon and Nike is like a larger than life brand in Portland, and they almost died so many times as a company, and then it's hard to believe that now as big as they are. They're going through some transitions now, but I think there's something so inspiring about the way that company was built in the early days, and they just never gave up and they kept going. And I also think from a brand perspective, for a long time, they have done an amazing job of sort of being that iconic brand. I remember, I tell this story, growing up in Portland, I'm one of four. My parents bought us, I think, like Under Armour or Adidas stuff for Christmas one year. And we all refused to wear it. They had to return it and get us Nike stuff because that's like, we grew up in like the Nike era. And so talk about brand, like it was strong. We were indoctrinated pretty young, there, but I think Shoe Dog is like a good, one of the best business books I've read in a while.
Love Shoe Dog. Phil Knight was an Army veteran, which is really interesting. He was my graduation speaker at business school.
Oh, cool.
And I actually still consistently write his assistant. During COVID, I sent them several copies of Shoe Dog. Phil Knight signed them, and so we give them to our founders. He's incredible, and Nike truly incredible. And you see the swoosh, and you're just like, that's a great brand.
Yeah.
Favorite hobbies?
So I have a couple hobbies. I actually ran in college, so I love running. I live a place where there's beautiful running, so that's my happy place. I just started swimming a few months ago, so I'm very slow but enjoy swimming. I swim a couple mornings a week before my kids get up, and I've just taken up pickleball, which is so fun and very social. Not the best workout, but really fun. And then I spend most of my time, free time, hanging out with my kids who are 3 to 5.
Running is the best way to clear the mind.
Mm-hmm.
I feel swimming is, I love swimming. And it's also a good way to clear your mind, but like the lap swimming can get a little bit just less entertaining.
I do master swim.
Okay.
So I just have to, it's like workouts, and I just follow the people in my lane and zone out and try and not let them get too far ahead of me. But it's so humbling because I swim with people who are a bit older than me and they kick my butt every morning. So but it's a great workout. And I actually didn't like swimming until I then started at Pear, where when I was working from home, I liked running better because it was more social, because I ran with a running group. And now that I'm in an office, actually swimming is like the quiet me time where I can think. So I appreciate it more since I've been working in an office.
Last question. Favorite candy, if you even like candy. And if you don't like candy,
I'm such a sweet tooth. I'll do favorite dessert, and it'll be tiramisu.
Fascinating. Kathleen, this has been awesome. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A lot of fun.